My brothers and sisters, every single change you wish to see in your life begins in a place no one else can see. It begins in the mind. Before actions are taken, before words are spoken, before destinies are shaped, a thought is born. And many of us, without realizing it, are prisoners of the stories we repeat to ourselves every single day. We tell ourselves we are not good enough. We tell ourselves we have failed too many times. We tell ourselves that our past defines us, that our mistakes have written our future in permanent ink. And slowly, quietly, those stories become beliefs. Those beliefs become barriers. And those barriers stop us from becoming who we were always meant to be. But ask yourself today, who told you these stories? Were they written by the one who created you? Or were they whispered by fear, by pain, by disappointment, by people who never truly knew your worth? Because the one who formed you did not create you broken, hopeless, or destined to fail. He created you with purpose, with potential, with the ability to rise again no matter how many times you fall. Transformation does not begin when your circumstances change. It begins when your thinking changes. The moment you let go of the negative story, the moment you stop feeding the voice that tells you you can't, something powerful happens. Your heart becomes lighter. Your vision becomes clearer. And hope, which was always there, begins to speak louder than fear. So today is not about pretending life is easy. It is about choosing which voice you listen to. It is about freeing your mind from narratives that no longer serve you and opening your heart to a story filled with mercy, growth, and renewal. Because when the mind is transformed, everything else begins to follow. The mind is not just a place where thoughts pass through. It is the command center of our entire existence. Every action you take, every reaction you give, every decision you make, first takes shape as a thought, long before that. Hands move, or the tongue speaks, the mind has already decided the direction. This is why the mind is a sacred trust. If it is nurtured, protected, and guided, it becomes a source of strength and clarity. But if it is neglected, it quietly becomes a battlefield where fear, regret, and self-doubt fight for control. Many people assume transformation begins with external change, a new job, a new relationship, a new environment, or new opportunities. Yet they carry the same thinking into these new spaces. And when the thinking remains unchanged, the outcomes remain the same. You can move to a new place, but if your mind is still trapped in old stories, you will rebuild the same limitations wherever you go. This is why true transformation always begins internally. The mind sets the ceiling for how far a person believes they can go. One of the greatest challenges of the mind is that it believes repetition equals truth. If a negative thought is repeated often enough, the mind accepts it as reality, even if it is completely false. A person may tell themselves, I always fail, or I'm not smart enough, or I don't deserve better. At first, it is just a passing thought. Then it becomes an assumption. Then it becomes an identity. Over time, the person stops questioning it and starts living according to it. This is how invisible chains are formed, not by circumstances, but by internal narratives. What makes this more dangerous is that these stories often sound like our own voice. We don't hear them as lies, we hear them as facts. We forget that the mind is influenced by past pain, trauma, criticism, and disappointment. A single failure can rewrite how a person sees themselves. A single harsh comment can echo for years. And instead of challenging these thoughts, we make them permanent residents in our minds. But here's the powerful truth. Not every thought deserves to be believed. Just because a thought enters your mind does not mean it is true. And it certainly does not mean it defines you. The mind is meant to be guided, not obeyed blindly. When you begin to observe your thoughts, rather than surrender to them, you take the first step toward freedom. Awareness is the beginning of transformation. The sacredness of the mind lies in its potential. It has the ability to heal or to harm, to build or to destroy, to elevate or to imprison. When you understand this, you become more intentional about what you allow to stay. You start questioning the stories you've been telling yourself for years. You ask, is this really who I am? Or is this who I became because of what happened to me? That question alone can change a life. Protecting the mind does not mean denying pain or pretending struggles do not exist. It means refusing to let pain write your entire story. It means acknowledging hardship without allowing it to define your worth. A transformed mind understands that setbacks are part of growth, not proof of failure. It understands that weakness does not cancel purpose, and mistakes do not erase value. When the mind begins to shift, behavior follows naturally. A person who believes they are capable will try again. A person who believes they are worthy will demand better for themselves. A person who believes they can grow will be patient with their own journey. This is why the mind is always the starting point. You cannot live a hopeful life with a hopeless mindset. You cannot move forward while constantly replaying the past. Transformation of the mind is not an overnight process. It is a daily commitment. Some days you will win the battle. Some days the old stories will try to return. But every time you choose awareness over autopilot, you weaken those negative narratives. Over time, what once felt impossible becomes natural. The mind learns a new language, one of mercy, resilience, and possibility. When you honor the mind as a sacred trust, you stop using it as a place of self-punishment and start using it as a place of growth. And from that space, real, lasting transformation begins. One of the most powerful yet destructive habits of the human mind is the stories it tells itself in moments of weakness, fear, and uncertainty. These stories are rarely loud or dramatic. They are quiet, repetitive whispers that slowly shape how a person sees themselves and the world around them. They often begin after a failure, a loss, a rejection, or a painful experience. Instead of treating the moment as an event that passed, the mind turns it into a narrative. This always happens to me. I am not meant to succeed, or nothing good lasts in my life. Over time, these thoughts stop being reactions and start becoming conclusions. What makes these negative self-stories so influential is that they feel personal, they sound logical, they feel justified because they are often built on real experiences. But while the events may be real, the meaning we assign to them is not always true. A single mistake does not mean you are a failure. A delay does not mean denial. A closed door does not mean every door will remain closed. Yet the mind, when left unchecked, loves to generalize, takes one chapter and turns it into the entire book. These inner narratives quietly influence behavior. A person who believes they always fail will stop trying. A person who believes they are unworthy will accept less than they deserve. A person who believes they are incapable will avoid opportunities before they even begin. The tragedy is that many people do not realize they are living according to a story, not reality. They assume they are being realistic, when in truth they are being restricted by fear disguised as logic. Negative self-stories also distort how we interpret the present. When something goes wrong, it is no longer just a challenge. It becomes proof that the story was right all along. This creates a cycle where the mind constantly looks for evidence to support its own negativity. Even blessings are downplayed, ignored, or dismissed as temporary. Success feels accidental. Joy feels fragile. Peace feels undeserved. This mindset robs a person of gratitude and replaces it with constant anxiety. One of the most damaging aspects of these stories is how they anchor us to the past. The mind replays old mistakes as if they are happening in the present. Regret becomes a daily companion. Shame becomes a constant weight. Instead of learning from the past and moving forward, the person lives in a mental loop, punishing themselves repeatedly for what cannot be changed. This not only drains emotional energy, but also blocks growth. You cannot move forward while mentally living backward. Letting go of these stories does not mean ignoring reality or denying responsibility. It means separating who you are from what happened. It means understanding that experiences shape you, but they do not define you. Growth begins when a person realizes that they are not the voice in their head, They are the one listening to it. That realization creates distance, and distance creates choice. When you begin to question your inner narratives, you weaken their power. You start asking, is this thought helping me or harming me? Is this belief pushing me toward growth or pulling me toward fear? Often, the mind resists this process because it is comfortable with familiarity, even if that familiarity is painful. But comfort is not the same as truth. Familiar pain still hurts, and familiar lies still limit. Releasing negative self-stories requires patience and consistency. These narratives were not built overnight, and they will not disappear in a single moment. But every time you challenge them, you reclaim a piece of your freedom. You begin replacing harsh self-judgment with self-awareness. You learn to speak to yourself with the same compassion you would offer someone you love. And slowly, the mind begins to soften. When these stories lose their grip, something remarkable happens. The future feels open again. Effort feels meaningful. Failure becomes feedback instead of a verdict. You begin to move through life with humility rather than fear, with hope rather than despair. Letting go of negative self-stories is not just a mental exercise. It is an act of mercy toward yourself. And in that mercy, transformation finds its way in. There comes a moment in a person's life when they must pause and ask a difficult but liberating question. Are the thoughts I carry truly meant for me, or have I been living by words that were never written for my soul? Many of the beliefs we hold about ourselves were not born from truth or wisdom, but from moments of pain, misunderstanding, or the limitations of others. Yet over time, these beliefs become so familiar that we assume they are part of who we are. We forget that not every story in the mind carries authority. Some of the heaviest inner narratives come from wounds that were never given time to heal. A child who was constantly criticized grows into an adult who believes they are never enough. A person who was betrayed begins to assume trust will always end in pain. A mistake made years ago becomes a permanent label. These stories feel convincing because they are rooted in emotional memory. But emotional memory is not the same as divine intention. What happened to you may have been real, but the conclusion you drew from it may not be. The danger lies in assuming that pain speaks truth. Pain speaks loudly, but it does not always speak accurately. When a person allows hurt to define their identity, they unknowingly give it power over their future. They begin to live cautiously, expecting disappointment, guarding themselves from hope. In doing so, they close doors that were meant to open, not because those doors were locked, but because fear convinced them not to knock. Letting go of stories that were never divinely written requires humility and courage. Humility to admit that we may have been wrong about ourselves. Courage to release beliefs that once felt like protection. For some, these stories became a shield. I won't try, so I won't fail. I won't love deeply, so I won't be hurt. But protection that prevents growth is not protection at all. It is a prison disguised as safety. There is a profound difference between accountability and self-condemnation. Accountability leads to growth. It says, I made a mistake, and I will learn from it. Self-condemnation leads to stagnation. It says, I am the mistake. Many people confuse the two and spend years punishing themselves in the name of responsibility. But no higher purpose is served by destroying your sense of worth. Correction is meant to elevate, not erase. When you begin to align your inner story with higher truth, you start viewing yourself through a lens of mercy rather than judgment. You understand that human beings are works in progress, not finished products. You recognize that falling does not cancel direction, and delay does not mean denial. You realize that growth is rarely loud or instant. It is often quiet, slow, and deeply personal. Releasing false narratives also means releasing the need to live according to expectations that were never meant for you. Some people carry the weight of others' projections, labels placed on them by parents, teachers, or society. Over time, these labels become self-fulfilling, not because they were true, but because they were never questioned. Freedom begins when you stop asking, who do they say I am? and start asking, who am I becoming? This process is not easy because the mind resists change even when change is necessary. Old stories feel familiar. They feel safe. But familiarity should never be mistaken for truth. When you choose to let go, the mind may protest, reminding you of past failures and fears. But every time you refuse to bow to those reminders, you strengthen a new narrative, one rooted in purpose and possibility. Letting go does not erase the past. It repositions it. The past becomes a teacher, not a jailer. It becomes a reference, not a residence. And in that shift, the heart finds space to breathe again. Hope returns, not as a fragile wish, but as a quiet confidence. When you release stories that were never meant to define you, you make room for a life that reflects who you truly are becoming, not who you were convinced you were. And that release is not weakness. It is one of the strongest acts of faith and self-respect a person can make. When a person releases the negative stories they have carried for years, a quiet transformation begins within them. The heart starts to feel lighter. The mind becomes calmer. And a new space opens up where self-doubt once lived. This space does not remain empty for long. It is naturally filled by something far more powerful: hope, mercy, and a renewed sense of purpose. These qualities do not arrive suddenly or dramatically, but they settle gently. Like light entering a dark room, once the curtains are finally drawn back, self-doubt thrives on harshness. It feeds on the belief that mistakes are proof of unworthiness and that flaws are signs of failure. Mercy, however, changes the entire conversation within the mind. When a person begins to treat themselves with mercy, they no longer see their struggles as evidence against them. Instead, they see them as part of the human journey. Mercy allows a person to acknowledge weakness without being crushed by it. It reminds them that imperfection is not a disqualification. It is a shared condition of being human. Hope grows in environments where mercy is present. When the inner voice shifts from accusation to understanding, the future no longer feels threatening. A person who once expected disappointment begins to expect growth. They no longer ask, what if I fail again? But rather, what can I learn if I try? This change may seem subtle, but it has immense power. Hope does not promise ease, but it offers direction. It tells the soul that tomorrow can be better than today, not because circumstances will magically change, but because the person is no longer anchored by despair. Replacing self-doubt also reshapes how a person interprets setbacks. Challenges no longer feel like confirmation of inadequacy. Instead, they become invitations to strengthen patience, resilience, and trust. A person rooted in hope understands that difficulty is not the end of the road, but often a necessary part of it. This understanding protects the heart from bitterness. It allows the individual to move forward without carrying resentment toward themselves or the world. Purpose begins to emerge when hope and mercy work together. Many people feel lost not because they lack ability, but because they lack belief in their own value. When negative self-talk dominates the mind, purpose feels distant and unrealistic. But when a person begins to see themselves through a lens of compassion, they start recognizing their potential. They understand that they are not defined by their lowest moments, but shaped by how they rise after them. A life driven by purpose does not require perfection. It requires sincerity. It requires the willingness to grow, to serve, and to contribute, despite fear. When self-doubt fades, courage quietly takes its place. This courage is not loud or boastful, it is steady. It allows a person to take steps forward, even when certainty is absent. Purpose is not always about knowing exactly where you are going, but about trusting that your efforts have meaning. Replacing self-doubt with hope also transforms relationships. A person who is kinder to themselves becomes kinder to others. They stop projecting their insecurities onto those around them. They listen more, judge less, and offer understanding instead of criticism. This inner shift creates outer peace. When the heart is not at war with itself, it finds it easier to live in harmony with others. There is also a deep sense of relief that comes with releasing constant self-criticism. Carrying self-doubt is exhausting. It drains energy, clouds judgment, and steals joy from even the smallest victories. When a person chooses hope, they give themselves permission to rest from that internal battle. They begin to celebrate progress instead of obsessing over shortcomings. Gratitude becomes easier, contentment becomes possible. This transformation does not mean that fear disappears completely. Fear may still visit, but it no longer leads. Doubt may still whisper, but it is no longer believed without question. Hope becomes the dominant voice. Mercy becomes the guiding principle. Purpose becomes the compass. And with these in place, the mind learns to move forward with balance and clarity. Replacing self-doubt with hope, mercy, and purpose is not about becoming someone new. It is about returning to who you were always meant to be before fear convinced you otherwise. And when that return happens, life does not become perfect, but it becomes meaningful. And that meaning is what sustains the soul through every season. Transformation does not announce itself with noise or sudden change. It begins quietly, often in a moment no one else witnesses, when a person becomes aware of the voice inside their mind. Awareness is the turning point, because before awareness, thoughts run unchecked, shaping emotions and decisions without permission. A person may live for years reacting, assuming their thoughts are facts and their feelings are instruction. But the moment they pause and observe their inner dialogue, something shifts. They realize they are not powerless. They are not trapped. They have a choice. Intention gives direction to that awareness. Without intention, awareness becomes passive observation. With intention, it becomes action. When a person intentionally chooses what they allow to grow in their mind, they begin the process of transformation. They start filtering their thoughts instead of absorbing them. They ask themselves whether a thought aligns with growth or keeps them chained to fear. This simple practice, repeated daily, slowly reshapes the mental landscape. The mind is naturally drawn to habit. It follows familiar pathways, even when those paths lead to pain. This is why negative thinking feels automatic. Awareness interrupts this autopilot. Intention redirects it. Each time a person chooses a hopeful response over a hopeless one, they carve a new mental path. At first, it feels forced and unnatural. The old patterns resist change. But with consistency, the new way of thinking becomes familiar, and familiarity turns into ease. Transformation begins the moment a person accepts responsibility for their inner world. This is not about blame, it is about empowerment. Blame says, this is your fault. Responsibility says, this is in your control. When someone understands that they cannot always control what happens to them, but they can control how they interpret it, they regain a sense of agency. Life no longer feels like something that happens to them. It becomes something they participate in consciously. Awareness also teaches humility. It reveals how often the mind exaggerates, assumes, and fears without evidence. A person begins to notice how many of their worries never come true, how many of their self-criticisms are harsher than reality. This realization softens the heart. It reduces arrogance and despair at the same time. One learns to say, I don't know everything, and that's okay. That acceptance brings peace. Intention protects progress. Without it, moments of clarity fade, and old habits return. Intention is what brings a person back when they slip. It reminds them why they started. It anchors them during difficult days. A person who acts with intention understands that transformation is not linear. Some days will feel heavy. Some days, the old stories will try to reclaim space. But intention ensures that these moments do not define the journey. Choosing awareness. And intention also changes how a person approaches time. They stop rushing the process. They become patient with growth. They understand that real change is built in layers, not leaps. This patience reduces frustration and self-judgment. It allows a person to appreciate small victories, a calmer response, a kinder thought, a moment of restraint. These moments, though small, are signs of deep change. As awareness deepens, gratitude begins to emerge naturally. The person becomes more present. They notice what is working instead of obsessing over what is missing. This does not mean they stop striving, it means they strive from a place of contentment rather than desperation. Intention ensures that goals are pursued with balance, not obsession. Eventually, awareness and intention reshape identity. A person no longer sees themselves as someone controlled by emotion or circumstance. They see themselves as someone growing, learning, and refining. Confidence develops not from arrogance but from self-trust. They trust that even if they stumble, they will recover. Even if they struggle, they will adapt. Transformation begins the moment awareness meets intention, not when life becomes easier, but when the mind becomes conscious. In that moment, a person steps out of survival and into purpose. And from that moment onward, every choice, no matter how small, carries the power to reshape the future.